Hi, I want to talk to you today about another popular verse, one that gets quoted a lot. And the part that gets quoted is this part right here that I've underlined. Be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Be prepared to make a defense. And this verse comes from 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. And it's kind of an intimidating verse, I think. I don't know about you, but when you hear this, I think a lot of people think, boy, I got to be ready to make a defense for just about anything. When I graduated Bible college, there was this process that we would go through that they called senior oral exams, where we'd go into a room with all the Bible college professors. We'd sit around a big conference table, and it was just you and them, and they would ask you anything they wanted about Bible or theology. And it was a source of quite a bit of trepidation among the students, because we were anticipating this time, and we would be put on the spot and could be asked about anything. I don't think that's exactly what Peter had in mind when he wrote this, so let's take a quick look at it and see what he actually says. Now, in the context of this passage, remember, 1 Peter is written to Christians spread all over the world, and in chapter 2 he was encouraging them to submit to the governing authorities, and then he encouraged servants to submit to their masters. If they were unbelieving masters, maybe they'd believe. And then he encouraged wives to continue to quietly honor and respect their husbands, even if their husbands were non-believers, because then maybe the husband would come to believe on Jesus. And then in chapter 3, verse 8, he says, all of you have a unity of mind and sympathy and brotherly love and a tender heart and a humble mind, and don't repay anyone evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. And then he quotes from the Psalms, and then he picks up in verse 13, he says, now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? So if you do good works, in general, people don't want to beat you up for that, right? But then verse 14, he says, but even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. And that's where our verse starts. So he says, have no fear of them, nor be troubled. And then he says, but in contrast to fearing people and being troubled by people when they speak ill of us or might even harm us, Peter says, no, on the contrary, in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense. So really there are three things that he's going to encourage the believers to do. And the main command is this one. If you think about it, this is the main verb in the whole verse. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. Honor Christ the Lord as holy. So before there's any kind of outward defense, there's an internal reality. Peter tells believers, there needs to be something taking place in your heart, right? And it needs to be that you honor. The word honor is a value word. You place a heavy value on Christ. The heart is where your value system is, right? It's where one desires. And with the heart, one then places a heavy value on Christ. You know, we hear the words Christ the Lord all the time. We don't think too much of them, but remember, the word Christ means Messiah, the promised Holy One through the Scriptures. So in your heart, you're going to acknowledge that Jesus is that promised Messiah, and that he is the Lord. So first you acknowledge him as Christ, and then you acknowledge him as Lord, and then you acknowledge him as holy. Lord means master, means boss, means person who's in charge. In your heart, you acknowledge that Christ, the promised Messiah, is your Lord. He's in charge of you. And that changes how you live and function in the world, doesn't it? And then he says, you're going to acknowledge Christ the Lord as holy, that is, set apart, distinct. Nothing competes with him. He is more precious than anything else that you might be tempted to place on his level. So this heart disposition then drives your behavior and your values, and it will change the way you live. You'll live hopefully and gently and not fearfully, like he talks about in this passage, because in your heart you've esteemed Christ as completely set apart and special and wonderful. Then he says, be prepared to make your defense, your argument. Notice he doesn't say go out and start an argument. He says people are going to come ask you. If you live in such a way that Christ is honored as holy, then people will see that when you suffer injustices and you take those graciously, they'll approach you and ask you, what is it that's different about you? What is this hope that you have that we don't have? Your circumstances don't seem to demonstrate hope. See, for most people, circumstances are the drivers of the way they respond in the world, right? So if things are going great and you're happily married and your house is in good shape and your kids are well behaved and everything's nice, you're healthy, then of course things will be good. You'll respond well in the world. But if things go badly, people expect you to respond badly with complaining or with despair or with fear and paranoia or with defiance. And so when they see you living counterculturally in that way, and they say, why do you do that? He says, then you can offer your defense. But your defense is a genuine revelation of your heart. You say, well, look, here's my value system in my heart, based on the scriptures. I highly esteem Jesus Christ. He's my Lord above any earthly king. He's my highest authority. He's my highest prize. I value him and I set him apart as distinct. And that changes the way I live. I live to honor and glorify him above everything else. So your defense is not, it's not like Peter saying you're going to be called upon to be Ravi Zacharias and you're going to have to give a defense for the age of the earth or to know your Old Testament history and Second Temple Judaism. He wants you to be ready to tell people why you're hoping in the Lord, right? And notice he says these people ask. They ask. You don't go beat people over the head. When you have a different value system, people see it. They ask a reason for the hope that is in you. See, it's in your heart where you've honored Christ as holy. The final thing he says is, when you do this, when you give them a reason, when you articulate your faith to people because they see you living differently, responding differently under trials, and he says, yet do it with gentleness and respect. Christians, above all, should be people who can articulate their love of Jesus with gentleness and respect. If we get engaged in debates with people and we exhibit anger and defensiveness and we're too strong, too heavy-handed, that's not a testimony. That's not something that makes people want to know the Jesus that we serve. And so we're at a time of quarantine where we don't have a lot of social interaction, and so maybe nobody's had the chance to ask you lately a reason for the hope that's in you, but we still have a little bit of social interaction, don't we? We still have the grocery stores, and there's still social media and Zoom calls and phone calls, and ask yourself, am I exhibiting a Christian hope? And if you're not, the answer is not to try harder to put up a facade. The answer is to change your heart, to reflect on the Lord Jesus himself and to value Jesus above everything else. Let's do that.